Avoiding your unfinished home projects because you're not sure where to start? Thumbtack knows home so you don't have to. Don't know the difference between matte paint finish and satin? Or what that clunking sound from your dryer is? With Thumbtack, you don't have to be a home pro. You just have to hire one. You can hire top-rated pros, see price estimates, and read reviews all on the app. Download today.
This back to school, hear your teen say something you never thought possible.
Thanks, Ma.
Come to your Boost store and take home iPhone 15 with its amazing camera and all-day battery for only $99.99. Perfect for back to school.
Thanks, Ma.
You won't get tired of hearing it. Visit your nearest Boost store. Requires ID verification, port in and activation on $60 per month plan and $35 device setup fee. Taxes extra.
And now, a next-level moment from AT&T Business. Say you've sent out a gigantic shipment of pillows, and they need to be there in time for International Sleep Day. You've got AT&T 5G, so you're fully confident. But the vendor isn't responding, and International Sleep Day is tomorrow. Luckily, AT&T 5G lets you deal with any issues with ease, so the pillows will get delivered and everyone can sleep soundly, especially you. AT&T 5G requires a compatible plan and device. Coverage not available everywhere. Learn more at att.com/5G network.
Hi, I'm Christy Schreiber, and we're here to discuss books that have changed the world and have changed us.
And I'm Gary Schreiber, and this is the How to Love Lit podcast. In episode 1 of our discussion of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, we introduced the author, Louisa May, and her family, focusing especially on the influence of her father, the transcendentalist philosopher Bronson Alcott. We introduced a story on which she based her story, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and we talked through the first 2 introductory chapters of part 1.
And don't forget that we met the March Sisters, the characters around whose lives our stories center, and that would be Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. We talked about the semi-autobiographical nature of the book, how Alcott drew from her own story and her own home and her own family to create this fictional family, the March family, and to recreate in kind of an idealized way her home in Concord, Massachusetts.
Well, today we will meet the March's neighbors, the Lawrences, both grandfather and grandson, and we'll talk through the next 15 chapters, thinking through Alcott's big ideas with Alcott as she entertains us while educating us how her vision of how we should do Pilgrim's Progress through this world.
Well, before we delve into the fictional world, I want to go back and talk about Bronson Alcott. Again, that's Louisa's dad and his relationship with his very famous second daughter, Louisa. Louisa was not like her older sister, and maybe this is the dynamic in your family. I don't know. But Louisa had an older sister whose name was Anna, and Anna was the easy child to raise. She was compliant. She was docile. She was easy to get along with. She was everybody's favorite, so to speak. Louisa was not that. She was difficult. She was demanding, noisy. She was like her mother in that she was stormy. She was a challenge to raise. She challenged her dad. She just couldn't conform the way her sister was able to. At one point, Bronson told Louisa this, and I'm going to quote him, "If in thyself or thy family thou hast a devil or two in plague and try thy prowess." In other words, there's something wrong with you. You must have some sort of devil. Maybe you have 2 devils inside of you. It's making it hard. He thought this of her mother as well, by the way.
Well, that does not sound like a vision of domestic harmony and transcendental peace. I mean, what about Bronson's utopian vision isn't working for his daughter?
But doesn't it sound like the dynamic between a first daughter and a second daughter?
Indeed.
But anyway, as many second children do, boys or girls, Alcott or Louisa, she challenged his idealism. But he would not be defeated. he had a strategy in order to tame, so to speak, his wild child. He knew how to get that devil out of his daughter, and his strategy was the theater. Bronson would stage allegorical dramas for his girls to act out. And when the girls were little, this was what they would do. They would go into their nursery and he would encourage them, and they would perform fairy tales and fables. And they would do this with dancing and write songs, and they would make up their own stories. And this became a household pastime. And they continued doing this all through their childhood, through their teenage years, and even into their adulthood. Now, Bronson believed that this was good for them because he thought that theater, not only was it a positive outlook and for creativity, but it helped with your impulsivity and it helped with your moody tempers. And guess where does theater show up? All over Alcott's work, starting with the beginning of Little Women. We see the March Girls doing this very thing throughout part 1 of Little Women. We see it in Chapter 2. This is Bronson's famous child-raising technique. And just like the March sisters and Little Women, the Alcott sisters, they went all out. That's actually true in real life. Just like they did it in the play, this is what the Alcott girls did in real life. The girls made their own costumes, and they would build these really complex stage devices, things like boats and towers or even balconies. And Anna and Louisa, they would memorize up to 5 or 6 parts a piece for one of their productions. And their plays had ghosts and murderers and witches and fairies. And they were acting out all kinds of real-life dramas on the stage in their home. So it's really, if you think about it, kind of a natural transition to see Alcott open up her groundbreaking book, doing the very thing that she and her sisters, all 4 of them, grew up doing, making up theatrical performances for their family. And for the March Girls, on Christmas Eve in Chapter 2, there was a bell, sounds, curtains flew up. The girls performed a play that had all the traditional characters of an Alcott play. A villain, an old witch, a love interest, a hero. All these were performed by the girls, complete with sets and costumes and musical interludes. Their play was titled The Witch's Curse, an Operatic.
And it is not long after the curtain closes on this play that we are introduced to the first men of the play, the Lawrences. Old Mr. Lawrence is a very rich and generous man who lives across the street with his grandson. Mr. Lawrence had heard from his servants that the Marches had given up their Christmas breakfast for the Hummels, and so in turn, he sent them treats way better than anything they would have had from their breakfast. He sent ice cream, 2 flavors of it, pink and white. He sent cake and fruit and French bonbons, and the girls were blown away. And in the next chapter, through a very funny set of circumstances, Joe and the rest of them are introduced to his grandson, a boy that is Joe's age, whose real name is Theodore, but who goes by the name Laurie.
And then, of course, we have the famous irony. Laurie is the boy and Joe is the girl. But what we have in Laurie is one vision of manhood. You know, we talked about last week that Alcott's writing a feminist book, and it's feminist because it's specifically written for girls, about girls being women. But what's interesting is that there are no male villains in the book, but there aren't idealized men either. They're just regular men. Just as she creates female characters that are good humans with flaws, she creates male characters that are also good, but also flawed, because that is inevitably our inescapable human condition. And of course, the men are not center stage, but there's just as many really men in the book as women. And just as all the girls are different and they model different ways of being a girl, the men are all different and they define what it means to be a man very differently. But every way that they define manhood is good. Alcott reassures us that even though we're flawed, and this is kind of what's so comforting about the book, even though we're flawed, and we know this if we're honest that we are, we can do things that we end up regretting. We can do things that are hurtful to the ones that we love. We can do all that. That in itself does not make us evil. What it makes us is a pilgrim. We're all pilgrims with bundles. And part 2 of the novel highlights the romantic relationships of the girls. We'll get into that in another episode. And even though part 1 of the novel does not do that, there isn't really a lot of romance. There's a little bit. It doesn't mean that men don't play an influential role in the lives of the Alcott little women. In part 1, we have mostly platonic relationships between men and women. And by men and women, I'm going to highlight the one man that kind of dominates the story, and that's the Lawrence boy. So we have one Lawrence boy, for the most part, and 4 March girls. And just like Alcott's girls carry bundles on their metaphysical journey to the celestial city, so does Laurie, Alcott's boy. Laurie also has a bundle. And if you notice the text carefully, you'll see Alcott highlight Laurie's bundles over and over again before he ever identifies it. Laurie has many virtues, no doubt, but he also has a flaw. Laurie's bundle is his laziness. And just as Laurie plays a big role in helping the girls get rid of their bundles, and we're going to highlight that throughout this part of the episode, the girls, all of the girls, play a role in helping Laurie get rid of his bundle. And he has a bundle that's a bad bundle. And it takes almost the entire book for Laurie to get rid of it. He will not get rid of his bundle until the end of part 2 of the book.
It is interesting that Laurie has the worst of the vices, but it's also interesting that laziness or idleness is Alcott's vision of the worst vice. And this may seem strange today, but considering the time period, it's not surprising. Hard work is a very American ideal, and this is not to say that other cultures don't value work, because they do, but being known as a hard worker is important to most Americans. There's a very distinctive American work ethic that has its roots in those first settlers who landed and were starving in New England. That'll make a worker out of you. These first Americans' esteem of hard work was rooted in their religion, but also in the necessity of everyone working in order to survive a harsh wilderness. And it eventually became known as the Puritan work ethic. And by Alcott's day, this American work ethic, or finding value in your job, had only grown. And by the 19th century, it was undisputed that everyone had a moral duty to do some sort of useful or productive work, and what you did must be considered productive. And it doesn't mean your work necessarily generated a high income. That was almost secondary. You were seen as a valuable member of society if you worked hard, and your hard work benefited yourself, your family, and your society. And just as being productive was next to godliness, idleness was sinfulness, hence the famous adage, idle hands are the devil's workshop. It went without saying that if you don't work, calamities will certainly fall in some form or another.
Well, not to make everything about literature, but we will see that the American value of hard work plays out in many pieces, especially in this period. I mean, we even talked about it when we talked about Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing. That poem, it's not about singing at all. It's about the sound of working and how beautiful it is when people value what they do, and we value the people who work. That's the noise in that poem of America. But one of the many places that this hardworking value shows up in Little Women is in the chapter about Camp Lawrence. And like I said, it doesn't just show up in this one chapter. If you notice, it's a motif, and it's going to repeat pretty much in every chapter. The girls are learning to work. But I want to point out the chapter about Camp Lawrence, because in that chapter, Laurie has several rich British friends visiting, and he takes them all on a picnic. And over the course of the afternoon, the British friends are mingling with the Americans, and they're comparing their lives and talking about school. But I want to read this particular excerpt and this dialogue out of chapter 11, because Alcott highlights the difference that work plays as a cultural value. Gary, if I read the Meg, would you read the Miss Kate lines?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure she had a very deep voice.
how beautifully you do it. I wish I could draw, said Meg with mingled admiration and regret in her voice.
Your mama prefers other accomplishments, I fancy. She did mine, but I proved to her that I had talent by taking a few lessons privately, and then she was quite willing I should go on. Can't you do the same with your governess?
I have none.
I forgot. Young ladies in America go to school more than with us. Very fine schools. They are, too, Papa says. You got to go to the private one, I suppose.
I don't go at all. I am a governess myself.
Oh, indeed, said Miss Kate, but she might as well have said, dear me, how dreadful, for her tone implied it, and something in her face made Meg color and wish that she had not been so frank.
Mr. Brooke looked up, and he said quickly, young ladies in America love independence as much as their ancestors did and are admired and respected for supporting themselves.
Oh, yes, of course. It's very nice and proper in them to do so.
So she tries to get herself out of that hole.
Right. Well, Miss Kate, who clearly she wasn't trying to be rude, just as we say, but she did dig herself a hole and she couldn't crawl out of it. And she was just completely shocked. But of course, that dialogue explores more than just attitudes about work, but also about class and gender. Alcott was giving her American sisters a lot of credit, but there is no doubt that to this day, in most American circles, there is no shame in hard work, even if it's blue collar or even low paying. If you are working hard, you are worthy of respect. And in America, so much of our identity comes from what they do. And, there's a good side of that, like what Alcott is highlighting with the March sisters and even Brooke, Laurie's tutor. But there's a downside, too. Being given value based on your ability to work is really one-dimensional, and it's an incomplete picture of a person. And this is what I mean. If you go to a dinner party in America and you meet someone, one of the first things they're going to want to know is what you do for a living. I mean, is this really the best way to assess a person? And in many parts of the world, the general belief is no. A person is not a sum of their work experiences. And to the point that it could be considered highly rude just to even ask a person what they do for a living. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're seeing a lot of Alcott's cultural perspective coming through in this text and in her culture. And she highly values hard work.
She really does. I mean, it's a big theme in Little Women, but honestly, it's a theme that runs through all of her novels, not just Little Women. Alcott goes out of her way to deliberately educate young people, especially young women, and teach them the philosophical value of work and why you shouldn't be idle. She ironically, I mean, it is kind of ironic that she learned this value of work from her father, both from his philosophical writings and things that he taught her, but also by the sheer necessity that he didn't earn very much money and she had to earn a living.
Well, I think Bronson Alcott proved the old adage that if you can't be a good example, you can at least be a terrible warning.
Oh.
For Louisa, working meant independence, and financial independence was the main reason she never got married. But honestly, all of the Alcott women worked, and Louisa's mother, Abba, supported their family for much of their marriage. All the other Alcott sisters worked, and beyond just working to earn a living, they also did a lot of charity work, just like you see the March girls doing. And money and work are very connected, and money was always on Louisa's mind. In her notes from 1851, she recorded that she had worked as a governess, a seamstress, and a servant. And for every job, she recorded in detail the pay that she received on a monthly basis and at the end of the year on an annual recap. For Louisa, work provides this opportunity for freedom and independence. And if she were to have a choice between freedom and independence or luxury without it, she'd rather have her independence.
Of course, that's arguable, and people don't agree on the answer.
Well, I don't know that she actually got confronted with a real choice. But.
Well, she ended up having her independence and her money and her luxury both. So she did, in some sense, have her cake and eat it too. But of course, we see the March girls being very concerned with work and money in almost every chapter. From Jo selling her hair to give $25 to her father in the hospital, to Amy begging for 25 cents to buy pickled lemons because she was in debt. She'd eaten so many other people's pickled lemons. It's the root of many of the March girls' problems. And they worked. Meg worked as a governess. Jo works for Aunt March. Beth, because she's too shy to go to school, she does most of the housework and she sews. Amy, we don't see her going to work, but she goes to school. The entire complication developed in chapter 11, the chapter called Experiments, is this notion that what would life be like, or would it even have any value if you didn't work? I mean, in that chapter, they conducted an experiment to see what life would be like if they all stopped working. And what the girls learned in that chapter is that idleness made them miserable. Idleness made them uncomfortable. And ultimately, idleness was not worth it. By the end of their week of idleness, I'll quote Jo on this. She said, "Lounging and larking don't pay," observed Jo, shaking her head. "I'm tired of it and mean to go to work at something right off." "Suppose you learn plain cooking. That's a useful accomplishment which no woman should be without," said Mrs. March, laughing audibly at the recollection of Jo's dinner party, for she had met Miss Crocker and heard her account of it. "Mother, do you go away and let everything be just to see how we'd get on?" cried Meg, who had suspicions all day. "Yes, I wanted you to see how the comforts of all depends on each doing their share faithfully. When Anna and I did your work, you got on pretty well, though I don't think you were very happy and amiable. So I thought, as a little lesson, I would show you what happens when everyone thinks only of herself. Don't you feel that it is pleasanter to help one another, to have daily duties which make leisure sweet when it comes, and to bear or forbear, that home may be comfortable and lovely to us all?" "We do, Mother, we do." "Then let me advise you to take up your little burdens again, for though they seem heavy sometimes, they are good for us and lighten as we learn to carry them. Work is wholesome, and there is plenty for everyone. It keeps from ennui and mischief. It's good for health and spirits, and gives us a sense of power and independence better than money or fashion."
I love how Alcott just interjects these little life lessons throughout the book. And I want to compliment her on the use of ennui also. A lot of times they are in the voice of Marmee, but sometimes they come from the voice of the narrator.
True. The narrator does do that. And when the narrator interjects the way that you just referenced, we're reminded that in some ways Little Women is supposed to be an allegory. The March home is a microcosm of the whole world. And for the March girls, their home is their entire community. And we see this surface in several places. I mean, they have their own post office. They have a theater. They even have a secret society. But all the lessons of life are learned and they're played out in this domestic space. So let's go back to Laurie, who we told you is one of the only males who's invited into this sacred space inhabited mostly by women. And we're going to find out that he has this lazy problem. But really, it's ironic that after all of this emphasis on hard work, she chooses to give laziness to Laurie as his problem. But we see why. Because Laurie is rich. He's an heir. He's being raised by a grandfather. So he has no real need to work the way that the March girls do. He's lazy because he can be. It's not to say he's a bad guy. I mean, he's not. From the beginning, Laurie is introduced as being amazing. I'll quote Jo here. She calls him a capital fellow. But Laurie is lonely. And not only is he lonely, he is in need of female influences. For Louisa May Alcott, and this is important to understand about the way that she's structuring the world, men and women are not out to get each other. They are made to complement each other. In the ideal world of the March household, men make women better, but women make men better. That's the ideal. And the ideal is what Alcott creates for us both in part 1 and again in part 2 of her book. We get to watch this mutually beneficial interaction between men and women, and that's almost the case in every interaction. In chapter 3, we meet Laurie, specifically Jo and Meg meet him at a party. Jo isn't allowed to dance because her beautiful sister Meg doesn't want Joe to embarrass her because her dress is burnt. So while Meg dances, Joe has to dutifully stand in the corner, hiding the back of her dress. And when she does, she ultimately runs into Laurie, whose bashfulness has put him in the corner. Laurie doesn't care about her burnt dress, and eventually they dance and become fast friends. But Laurie's first confession is that he doesn't want to go to college. Instead, he wants to go to Italy and live in his own way. Just this very idea confuses Joe. Anyway, by the end of the night, Meg has twisted her ankle. She can't walk. Laurie sees her dilemma and offers his grandfather's carriage. The friendship has begun, each taking care of the other. And as the pilgrimage of the girls continues through part 1, they're often aided on their journey to the celestial city by their male companions, the residents of the Lawrence household. So we have the first meet and greet, but the second March girl to be aided by a Lawrence is Beth. And she will not be aided by Laurie, but she will be aided by his grandfather. Now, if you remember, Beth is the most saintly of all the sisters, and her bundle is that she is just too shy. Now, Beth is also the musical sister. And chapter 6 is about Beth, and it's titled Beth Finds the Palace Beautiful. What's a palace beautiful? Well, if you know what Alcott does, she pulls all these symbols from Pilgrim's Progress, and Palace Beautiful is a place in Pilgrim's Progress. Palace Beautiful is often considered to be a symbol for Christ's church. And what it represents in Pilgrim's Progress is a place where Christians receive refreshment. It's restorative. It reinforces this theme that pilgrims are not meant to travel by themselves. So we have Beth's problem. She's afraid to be with other people. But in this chapter, Mr. Lawrence goes out of his way to connect with Beth. He has a beautiful piano, and she loves music. Mr. Lawrence makes a way for her to come into his home undetected and play his piano. Let's read how Alcott describes what he did.
After that, the little brown hood slipped through the hedge nearly every day, and the great drawing room was haunted by a tuneful spirit that came and went unseen. She never knew Mr. Lawrence often opened his study door to hear the old-fashioned airs he liked. She never saw Laurie mount guard in a hall to ward the servants away. She never suspected that the exercise books and the new songs which she found in the rack were put there for her special benefit. And when he talked to her about music at home, she only thought how kind he was to tell things that helped her so much. So she enjoyed herself heartily and found, what isn't always the case, that her granted wish was all she had hoped.
I mean, the whole relationship between Mr. Lawrence and Beth, it's just such a sweet exchange. Mr. Lawrence had lost a little girl. His connection with Beth moves him and it changes him. Beth, as a way to thank him, gives him slippers that she's made. He, by way of thanking her, gives her a piano of her own. Let's read the end of this chapter. After Beth receives the piano, she marches over to Mr. Lawrence's house, goes up to the old man, puts his arms around his neck, and kisses him. Let's read how it ends.
If the roof of the house had suddenly flown off, the old gentleman wouldn't have been more astonished. But he liked it. Oh, dear, yes. He liked it amazingly and was so touched and pleased by that confiding little kiss that all his crustiness vanished, and he just set her on his knee and laid his wrinkled cheek against this rosy one, feeling as if he had got his own little granddaughter back again. Beth ceased to fear him from that moment and sat there talking to him as cozily as if she had known him all her life. For love casts out fear, and gratitude can conquer pride. When she went home, he walked with her to her own gate, shook hands cordially, and touched his hat as he marched back again, looking very stately and erect, like a handsome soldierly old gentleman as he was. When the girls saw that performance, Jo began to dance a jig by way of expressing her satisfaction. Amy nearly fell out of the window in her surprise, and Meg exclaimed with uplifted hands, "Well, I do believe the world is coming to an end."
Very sweet. And you see how it does help her become not shy. But the older Lawrence, and he's not the only man that will help the girls on their journey. Lori also plays a role. If you remember, Beth's bundle is her shyness, but Joel's bundle is her temper. And in Chapter 8, Joe's temper is severely provoked by her sister Amy. The chapter is titled, Joe Meets a Poyon. A poyon is a word that comes again right out of Pilgrim's Progress. In Pilgrim's Progress, a poyon is a character. He's a demonic, dragon-like figure whose name means destroyer. Apollyon rules over the city of destruction and tries to persuade Christian to turn back from his pilgrimage. In this chapter, Amy severely injures Joe, and Joe justifiably just about loses it. No, let's not say she just about. She does lose her temper, and she has a good reason to. Let me quote the book. Amy's bonfire had consumed the loving work of several years.
Alcott describes what Amy has done as a calamity. I mean, there is nothing that Amy could have done that could have struck at the heart of Joe's passion and personhood more than burning all of her writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the severest of injuries, and it's justifiable that she'd be upset, and you would think that the chapter would be about Amy, but it's not. Alcott does not dwell on what Amy did. The emphasis is how Joe reacts to this very severe injury. And in some ways, it doesn't seem fair to tell Joe, just forgive your sister. Don't let the night go down on your wrath. I mean, I agree with Joe when she says it was an abominable thing and she don't deserve to be forgiven.
For sure. Alcott makes it clear that Amy is in the wrong and that she doesn't deserve to be forgiven. So the question becomes, what does one do in this situation? And it's not an easy situation, but it's also not a strange one. I mean, all of us have done things that have hurt other people, and we have been hurt by other people. Understandably, Joe wanted time away. And so she goes outside to ice skate with Lori and Amy, who by this time has apologized and wants the whole thing to be behind her. She wants to come after her older sister. Lori tells Joe to be careful because the ice is thin in the middle of the lake. Amy doesn't hear him, and she falls through the ice. Lori sees what has happened, and he flies over, and he rescues Amy, and he takes her home. Joe, of course, feels horrible because she had ignored her sister out of anger, and her sister could have died.
So the question becomes, do we just let people do whatever they want to do to us, and it doesn't matter how bad it is? We should just forgive them?
It's not an easy problem to resolve. And of course, the Christian perspective, as we see in the Sermon on the Mount, is to forgive 70 times 7. But that feels very counterintuitive and unnatural. But it's actually what Marmee does. I mean, she's the moralizer in the story, and she tells Joe she has to do it.
She says this, Joe, dear, we all have our temptations, some far greater than yours, and it often takes us all of our lives to conquer them. You think your temper is the worst in the world, but mine used to be just like it. Yours, Mother? Why, you're never angry. And for the moment, Joe forgot remorse and surprise. I've been trying to cure it for over 40 years, and have only succeeded in controlling it. I am angry, she says, nearly every day of my life, Joe, but I have learned not to show it, and I still hope to learn not to feel it, though it may take me another 40 years to do it. The patience and humility of the face she loved so well was a better lesson to Joe than the wisest lecture, the sharpest reproof. She goes on to say, Mother, are you angry when you fold your lips tight together and go out of the room sometimes when Aunt March scolds or people worry you? Asked Joe, feeling nearer and dearer to her mother than ever before. Yes, that's what her mom says.
So do you think this is all about gender norms and this is about a female reaction to anger?
Well, I've read several female critics who would argue that that's what it is exactly, but I'm really not convinced that's what Alcott thinks is right. Forgiveness has to happen for community to exist. I mean, we learned this from war victims. We read it in biographies. War victims will tell you that. The March family is a microcosm of community. In fact, it's the model community. And you cannot live in community without forgiveness, even if you've suffered something that's very painful and hurtful.
I guess it goes back to that line that I have said many times. You can be right and you can be alone.
Well, that's it exactly. And an isolation in the world of Little Women and our ideal little microcosm of how people should live is just not an option.
Well, it is interesting that Alcott brought Lori into the scene. This could have been a scene just between the girls.
I know. That is interesting. And it's important to pay attention to that because in literature, details are never to be tossed away. Why did Alcott include Lori in this scene? Why didn't she just have Joe fish her out of the ice? I mean, that's what would make the point of forgiveness, but yet it isn't. Laurie fishes her out. Now, when details throw off where we think the author is going, we don't need to change the details of the story so that we understand what we want to understand. What we have to do is adapt our interpretation to the details that seem odd. And having Laurie be the hero here, to me, seems odd. This chapter is not about Laurie. It's about Joe and Amy. The emphasis is on Joe, in spite of Amy being the original transgressor. So for me, the key to understanding the emphasis of the episode is found when I remember that in the world of Little Women, it's a matriarchal world. It's not a patriarchy. Women rule. The men do not rule. They're just barely there. Marmee issues wisdom, not father. Laurie is invited into the scene as Joe's friend, but he's also there as Marmee's son. He's, one of the girls, if you want to think of it that way. I'm not saying that he's feminine because he's not, but he's just one of the kids. And Laurie, like Joe and the other sisters, is learning to love the way Marmee wants them to love. He's also learning to be a man from Marmee, just as the girls are learning to become women from her. In chapter 21, almost at the end of part 1, Laurie does something that also needs forgiveness. He's really cruel to Meg. In fact, he humiliates her, and he does it on purpose. Humiliation, just like burning all your things, is something that's really hard to forgive. But not only is Laurie forgiven, he's protected by Marmee, and he's supported by Joe. In chapter 21, after the incident with Meg, Laurie goes home. He's really upset about what has happened. Things went badly. Joe goes to the Lawrences, and she intercedes between him and his grandfather. And this is what she says as Laurie worries that the sisters, because of what he did, will never forgive him, and he had broken that relationship forever. Let's read the dialogue.
Hey, it got all around. Even you cast me off over there, and I felt just ready to go to the deuce, he began apologetically.
Don't talk in that way. Turn over a new leaf and begin again, Teddy, my son.
I keep turning over new leaves and spoiling them as I used to spoil my copybooks, and I make so many beginnings there will never be an end, he said dolefully.
Go and eat your dinner. You'll feel better after it. Men always croak when they're hungry. And Joe whisked out of the front door after that.
In the matriarchal world of Alcott, there's not just a place for forgiveness, there's just a necessity for it.
That's exactly right. And that's what this whole thing is about. Alcott's emphasis here is on love and its connection with forgiveness, and it's rooted in her Christian world for sure, but it's also rooted in her feminist world. Masculinity is never diminished in Little Women, but we will see more and more that men are incorporated into the world of Little Women. And when they are, it softens them. So even here, look how Jo is described. She's the teacher. She addresses Laurie as son. The men of Little Women are still the providers. They're still very much the protectors. The Lawrence home is a retreat, and it's not just for Beth with the piano. It's for Jo, too, and the library, and Meg in the garden, and ultimately it will be Amy's home. But men can be leaders, and they can wield a lot of influence, but they are going to become more affectionate, more expressive, more nurturing, more forgiving because of the interaction with the women in their lives. So, we saw Amy's bundle. We saw Joe's bundle. So we've talked about Laurie's bundle. It's going to be a long way before he gets that fixed up. Let's talk about Meg. And her bundle is Vanity. She, of course, is the prettiest of all the girls. And she's the most conscious also of how shabbily they look. I mean, the March girls can't dress well compared to their peers. Well, in Chapter 9, Annie Moffat, the rich girl in town, invites Meg over for a multi-day visit, and this is a big deal. It'd be kind of like me getting invited as a VIP to the Oscars, or you, Gary, being invited as a political dignitary to an inaugural ball. For Meg, it felt like that scale. So there's this series of social events, and it ultimately results in a ball. But Meg's problem, like mine would be if I were invited to something that was fancy like that, is she doesn't have clothes for it. And she's obviously different. This is a problem. Looking different because you can't dress the part is a problem every girl can relate to at some point.
And don't I know, okay? Because I teach in an all-girls Catholic school. This chapter hits a little too close to home. So there's so much discussion about clothes, the details about the gloves, the silks, the fine clothes, the shabby ones down to the shade of blue, sky blue in the case of the dress. And Meg was uncomfortably dressed and complete with a tight waist and immodest neckline. And I mean, it just went on and on and on describing all this. And I can see why girls love this book. A lot of details about clothes.
I agree. I love the details about clothes. But in girl world, and don't get me wrong, I know men are not totally immune to this, but clothes can really define you. And it's an awful feeling when you feel underconfident in what you're wearing. I mean, I felt it myself. I remember when I was 15, my best friend Christiana and I were invited to this very fancy party. It was a big deal. It was such a big deal that I had a dress made, blue also, and a strapless blue dress and a white jacket. And my friend Christiana, she made a white dress. And we thought we were so gorgeous. We thought we were so appropriate. We thought we were so fancy. When we got to the party, we were the only ones wearing dresses. Everyone else looked like they were heading to a club. They were wearing trendy clothes. They had name brands. We looked like we were going to church. We wanted to crawl under a punch bowl. We were out of place, and it was obvious. And this is kind of how Meg feels. She feels like she would like to make friends, but she's afraid, and she was, when she was dressed shabbily, mostly ignored. And I will tell you, when I was at my party like that, I was mostly ignored too.
Well, let me point out that the girls at Annie's party are not mean to Meg. In fact, they dressed Meg up in their clothes for the ball. And to use Alcott's words, they turned Meg into a fine lady. But as Meg understands, she's not one of them. And Alcott says this: Meg, say only pity for her poverty in her heart felt very heavy as she stood by herself, while the others laughed and chattered, prinked and flew about like the gauzy butterflies. The hard, bitter feeling was getting pretty bad when the maid brought in a box of flowers. Before she could speak, Annie had to cover off, and all were exclaiming at the lovely roses, heath, and ferns within. You know, it's for Belle, of course. And George always sends her some, but these are altogether ravishing, cried Annie with a great sniff. They are for Miss March, the man said. And here's a note, put in the maid, holding it to Meg. What fun! Who are they from? Didn't know you had a lover, cried the girls, fluttering about Meg in a high state of curiosity and surprise. The note is from Mother, and the flowers from Laurie, said Meg, simply yet much gratified that he had not forgotten her.
Laurie to the rescue once again, making her feel valued. And of course, we see this in Chapter 18 when Amy is sent away to Aunt March, and Laurie comes to visit Amy in that chapter every single day. There are things that women can do for men, but there are things that men can do for women. And Laurie showing up as a knight in shining armor at this party makes Meg feel valuable, and he brings a gift right at the right moment.
Except that's not the end of it. There's a complication.
You're right.
Once again, Alcott adds details to make the story not fit the common cliche of boy rescuing girl. Laurie shows up at the ball as he was invited. He takes one look at Meg in her fancy dress, and he disapproves. He literally tells her he doesn't like her dress like that.
I know. And when I read that, it really annoyed me because I would have wanted to have been dressed like that. And my first thought was, Why can't Laurie just be admiring and approving? Let her have her night. Good Lord. I mean, that's what I would have wanted to hear if I were Meg.
Well, he's a dude. And one reason may be that it strikes Lori as inauthentic. I mean, this isn't the Meg that he knows, but in his defense, after he tells her he doesn't like her dress, he walks it back a little and he says this, "Please forgive my rudeness and come and dance with me." But I think the damage is done.
Yeah, because she says, "I'm afraid it would be too disagreeable to you," said Meg, trying to look offended, but failing entirely.
"Not one bit of it. I'm dying to do it. Come, I'll be good. I don't like your gown, but I do think you are just splendid." And he waved his hands as if the worlds failed to express his admiration.
Well, there's a lot more that happens in part one, and we can't get into all of it. What we find out after this party and they go home, that Beth will get sick, in part due to Joe's negligence and Meg's negligence. Amy gets sent away. Meg will get a suitor. There's lots of things that happen. This is a book about women, and that's primarily what it's about. But what I want to point out in this episode, and I think this is the point that we're trying to make, that men are not incidental. Men are not enemies. Men are not irrelevant. Both men and women are pilgrims. And this book about women, for women, we see Alcott creating a world where men and women coexist, enriching each other's lives. In part one, these relationships, for the most part, are platonic. This is an ideal world, and this is an ideal way that men and women should relate. It's an entirely matriarchal world because the home is a serious place for character formation. Within the home, they do have serious issues. There's financial issues, there's health issues, there's socio-political issues. But it's still a loving and self-sacrificing world where women learn to be better women, but men also learn to be better men.
It's a compelling argument and a radical idea, really. I mean, take an adventure story like Pilgrim's Progress and set it in a family of all girls led by a woman and introduce men one at a time and watch men learn to be better men because of the women in their lives.
Yes, and let women learn to let men into their networks, which is something women sometimes don't want to do. Let men into their confidence and ultimately let men into their hearts. After Meg comes back from Annie's party, she confesses overhearing that people were talking about her at the party, and they were talking about the fact that her mother was conspiring to land her a rich boy. That kind of talk humiliated her when she started thinking about what people were thinking about her and that her mother had plans for her. And she flat out asks her mom. Marmie's response, of course, is perfect. And this is what Marmie said. "I want my daughters to be beautiful, accomplished, good, to be admired, loved, and respected, to have a happy youth, to be well and wisely married, and to lead useful, pleasant lives, with as little care and sorrow to try them as God sees fit to send. To be loved and chosen by a good man is the best and sweetest thing that can happen to a woman. And I sincerely hope my girls may know this beautiful experience."
This seems such a strange thing to say for a woman who prized her own independence and never married and didn't seem to trust it very much. I mean, do you think this is just a concession to the publisher to get the book published for girls?
Again, lots of people have said that. And I think when they made the movie, this last version, that's what the producer thought. That's how he had the movie end. But I don't really think so. And I'll tell you why. And this is the reason why I think that's not really what she thinks. After all these years, the book as it is still in print. And I'll tell you this, and I'll say it as a wife and as a mother, there's no way that I would ever claim to have lived a perfect life. I mean, I have not lived a perfect life, and I have plenty of bundles, and I am certainly no Marmie. But I do identify with Marmie in that I also have this sweet wish for my daughters. I don't know if I'd go so far to say that being loved and chosen by a good man is the best and sweetest thing, because there are lots of wonderful and sweet things in the world. But I certainly will say it's one of the best, as I sit here across from a good man, and I can attest to that.
Oh, well, thank you. I think I can say the same thing. And on that sweet note, we will conclude. Even though there was more to talk about in part 1, I think time's caught up with us in this episode. And next episode, we'll skip to part 2 and watch the girls venture from inside their safe home out into the world. And we hope you will join us. Thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting the podcast. As always, as a way for supporting us, please share about us with your friends. Text an episode to a friend, to somebody who's a lover of the book Little Women. Share it on Instagram or by word of mouth. It's when you share that we grow, and thank you always as you help us on our mission to make great literature as enjoyable and accessible to as many people as possible.
Peace out.
This back to school, hear your teen say something you never thought possible.
Thanks, Ma.
Come to your Boost store and take home iPhone 15 with its amazing camera and all-day battery for only $99.99. Perfect for back to school.
Thanks, Ma.
You won't get tired of hearing it. Visit your nearest Boost store. Requires ID verification, port in and activation on $60 per month plan and $35 device setup fee. Taxes extra.
As the main character of your life, you know how important it is to make the right choices for you, and how sweet it is to feel good about your decisions. With the State Farm Personal Price Plan, you have options to help create an affordable price for you, so you can continue living your best life. Talk to a State Farm agent today to learn how you can choose to bundle and save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
The sun is out and temps are climbing, so there's only one choice. Hudsonville ice cream. From Traverse City Cherry Fudge to Brownie Batter Cookie Dough to Super Scoop, you can scoop up all your summer favorites from Hudsonville. Made with real milk and cream, Hudsonville is the ice cream your summer deserves. Creamy and delicious with mix-ins in every bite. This summer, skip the basics. Choose the best. Choose Hudsonville. Visit HudsonvilleIceCream.com to find your favorite near you.